Get started. Good afternoon and welcome to ASE's new Lunch and Learn series. My name is Robert Touchstone and I'm so happy you could join us today. Krista Terrell, our new acting president, also wanted me to say a word of welcome since she is muted and her video is turned off at the moment. The purpose of this monthly series is to share some of the lesser known stories of ASE's work in the community. This series is made possible through the work and support of our Young Donor Society, affectionately known as YDS. YDS is a leadership giving society for people 40 and under that is managed and programmed by an all-volunteer steering committee. If you're interested in learning more about YDS, I'll be dropping a link into the chat for you to access. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Please stay muted throughout the discussion to avoid any feedback, and please turn off your video so we can see the presentation in large format. We do invite your questions and ask that you use the chat feature to pose those. Sharice Clark and I will be fielding those throughout the meeting and sharing them with the panel during the Q&A portion of the program. Finally, the session is being recorded so we can share the content with others who could not make the live version. Now let's get started with the topic, ASE's grant panels. It's my pleasure to introduce Liz Fitzgerald, ASE's Program Director for Grants and Services. Take it away, Liz.
Thank you, Robert. And it is fantastic to have this time with everybody and to really celebrate the work of ASE's grant panels and what the grant panel process means for our support for creative arts, science, and history here in Charlotte and Mecklenburg. I am really happy to have Tiffany Blackwell, Bre Stallings, and Keith Cradle with us today. And they're each going to share some of their experiences as panel members to really kind of reveal what does this mean for us in our selection process and the way that we support arts in our community. Give me just a second, and I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint screen. So to begin with, what is a grant panel? If you have served on a hiring committee in your workplace, you have experienced something like what it means to be on a grant panel. It is really a group of people who are charged with helping to select among many great applicants who is best to serve our community based on the criteria of a particular call for grants. The purpose of the panel is really important to a mission like a group such as the Arts and Science Council. ASC is based on the idea of collecting giving from individuals, from organizations, from businesses to be able to support art, science, and history here in our community. And so the grant panel is an extension of that collective process. It's a way of really being able to include the community in choosing what our priorities are. And so a grant panel is meant to reflect who that community is. It's meant to reflect the diversity of the disciplines that we are considering for grants. It's meant to reflect the diversity of neighborhoods and of people who are served by the work of the grantees. So it has a very important part of reflecting who we are as a community. Those panelists are charged with evaluating each grant proposal according to the criteria that are outlined in the grant call. So each grant call that we have has a very different purpose and a different way of reaching and extending support into the community. And so each panel is oriented to what is that purpose and how can they help to elevate that purpose through their selection of grant applicants. I think another important part of that evaluation is in really creating feedback that can be shared with our cultural providers here so that they can learn more how they are serving the community and how they can better serve the community. The final purpose of a grant panel is really to maximize the impact of our dollars. It is that maximization might happen through making sure that we're supporting programming that reach large numbers of people or reach into each corner of our county. It might also be that maximizing that happens through providing programming that really gives a depth of experience and allows people to have a really deep and meaningful experience through art, science, and history programming. There are some different roles in the application review process. So ASC is, I'm certainly proud to be a member of the staff that is involved in the grant making process, but my role as a staff member and of the other staff members at ASC is really advising and assisting the applicants as they navigate the application process. We do the process of checking for eligibility and completeness in the applications before we send the information forward to the panel. We want to be good stewards of the panel's time, so we do that evaluation of eligibility at the front end. An example of that is most of our grants are specific to folks who live in Mecklenburg County or organizations based here in Mecklenburg County. So if we receive an application from California, we're going to reach out to that group and let them know that it's not eligible. We help to select who the panel members are. And so really keeping in mind what the purpose is of each grant, we select a panel that has the different disciplinary expertise on board, making sure that we have visual artists on the panel if we're talking about a grant that is supporting the work of visual arts, making sure that we have community members if it's meant to serve a particular neighborhood. And then finally, we kind of take the panel's decisions and communicate that back out to the grant recipients, to the communities that are being served by those grants. And we're proud of the work of our whole team at ASC in celebrating and telling the stories of the creative partners that we have. Grant panelists are charged with an independent application review. They're given specific scoring criteria and they go through reading all of the applications and attributing a score based on those criteria, bringing their own expertise and experiences to that process. Collectively then, the panel meets to deliberate the merits. And I think that discussion, that collective discussion and deliberation is really the heart of the work of a grant panel. It's that opportunity to hear different perspectives and different values and collectively come to a decision. Ultimately, our grant panelists help to determine the award amounts. In some cases, that is preset. So our fellowships that we have for creative individuals have a preset award amount that our creative renewal fellows receive $10,000. So the panel knows coming in how many awards they're going to be able to make. But in some cases, such as with our cultural vision grants or operating support panels, those amounts might be really variable depending on how many applications the panel chooses to support. There are several different grant opportunities that we have at ASC, and each of those require a different type of panel. Our operating support panels are generally comprised of folks from outside of the community and really helping to assess the value of community partner organizations as it fits into the whole ecosystem, both regionally and nationally. And so that expertise from others situated similar to ASC is an important part of our being able to evaluate how are our significant cultural partners fitting into that whole landscape. Cultural vision grants and culture blocks panels are typically comprised of both community members as well as creative creators that are doing the work here. So it's a real mix because the intention is both highlighting the most excellent creative art, science, and history programming, but also making sure that those dollars are invested in communities and neighborhoods. So we make sure that both of those skill sets are represented on our panels. For individual artist grants and fellowship panels, we make sure that we really fill those panels with creative workers. They are the ones who have been through professional development. They have seen the scope of their career and what aids that process. And so we rely on their expertise. Sometimes those are folks who have received the awards in the past. Sometimes it's folks who may not be applying at this moment, but are doing that work and are supporting their fellow creators by serving on a grant panel. In 2019, ASC adopted our cultural equity statement. And within that statement, we really made sure that the work of panels was described as part of our commitment to equity. This has been a long-standing truth for ASC, so this wasn't necessarily new work, but it was really a confirmation of how important a grant panel can be in supporting our work and making sure that it is equitable in the support for communities. So grant panels ensure that more underinvested and underrepresented communities can compete equitably for artist commissions, for our grants and other financial investments. Some of the ways we help to reinforce that are through the questions that we ask panelists to consider. Animating Democracy, which is a project of Americans for the Arts, has derived a whole list of questions for potential arts panelists to consider as they're looking at grant applications. And I've included here just a few of those examples of what those kinds of questions might mean. And it's part of the way that we really center equity in our panel process. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I want to invite Tiffany and Bree and Keith to introduce themselves and to say a word about kind of what has your experience been serving as a grant panelist. And Tiffany, can I start with you?
Sure. Again, my name is Tiffany Blackwell. When I'm not having fun on the ASC board, I work for the city of Charlotte in the budget office. And I have been there for about 5 years. I've been on the ASC board for about 6 years, so time really does go by quite quickly. I will say I think the most rewarding part about reviewing grants is being able to hear people's stories. And I encourage whenever you're submitting applications to let your story shine through. The more unique and more relatable the stories are, I feel like those are the grants that tend to really shine and stick out. I'm also really encouraged by persons who are comfortable being uncomfortable, saying that they have not been in this space. This is a new realm for them. They're willing to try something new. And I find that to be quite refreshing, to admit vulnerability and to say that there's a need or an opportunity somewhere and you may not speak the language, but you're willing to jump in. So I find that to be quite refreshing. And I also, have to applaud the ASC team for their continued collaboration and partnership with the community. Every time I think we speak to, a grant applicant or we're reviewing applications, someone from the ASC team will say, oh, I met with this person and they're really working on this and they're really trying to get this across. So it's really helpful for them to, have such great connections with the cultural and arts community so that we can continue to push ASC's mission, but also creative individuals and your mission and your goals across this great county that we serve. So I'll stop collaborating. All right, next person.
Thanks, Tiffany. Bree, how about you?
So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bre Stallings, and I am a professional artist, muralist, and illustrator living here in Charlotte. I know many people on this call, so hey, y'all. I have this kind of unique privilege and position to have been an artist who applies for a lot of grants, and then also somebody who has sat on a lot of grant panels. And I actually have like a list of notes, and I don't know if Liz wants me to go over my bullet points now or later, but I just had some tips to kind of offer because I do see a lot of working artists and social practitioners on this call that I think, sitting on a grant panel does help give you that insight as to what's important and what people are talking about and kind of how they're ranking something kind of separate from the emotional quality of the project and the application, which is really, really important, is to kind of understand that side of it. And so it's this kind of teacher student flip-flop that I've been writing with my career, and it's very helpful because it helps you to kind of look at your work with a critical eye, and then also understand on a macro perspective what's important to the community, where the money is going, who's helping to make those decisions, and why, right? Like kind of understanding the larger puzzle pieces that help to play, and then you can contextualize your work and the work around you. So as an artist, I always say, like, it's really important if you can to sit on a grant panel and to just, you know, kind of glean into those conversations. And then it's also a privilege, you know, it's an honor to be chosen, because I think that people are saying that they see in me some of those qualities that, you know, they're kind of approving that I would help along with that process. So yeah, I got bullet points, Liz, but we can come back to that.
We'll definitely get to your bullet points.
Okay, cool.
Keith, let's give you a moment to introduce yourself and your experience serving on grants panels. There we go.
Good now. So good afternoon, everyone. Keith Cradle, Director of Youth and Juvenile Services for the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office. I currently serve on the Beckler Board and a few other nonprofit boards here in Charlotte. I've got, you know, a litany of grant experience in terms of writing grants. I cut my teeth at the health department writing fatherhood initiative-based grants. So I know how it is to have to, you know, speak to the RFP. But in terms of doling out money, I started out with the Knight Foundation, handing out, you know, being a part of that participatory process of handing out grant money in our community, of course, with the Arts and Science Council, the City of Charlotte. And so, you know, just looking forward to this great conversation and hoping we can help some folk in the best way possible.
Thank you. So, Bree, I'm going to, since you already started with your suggestion of your list, I would like to kind of come to you with what are some insights you've learned as a panel member that the general public might not know about Charlotte's creative scene and the panel process?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, and you can kind of read it in the application, they're kind of nervous when they're submitting it. And it's a little bit like the language is really like hopeful and kind of like, it has to be this or it's not going to happen. It's like, no, there's kind of an ebb and flow of these things. And it's a little bit longer and stretched out. And something I like to remind people is that, you know, slower processes are healthy processes. And so it's just, it doesn't have to always fit kind of rigidly into these things. And it doesn't mean it's a bad idea. Sometimes it's just not the best fit. But yeah, as an artist and a panel member for many of the same things, including things that I've like previously won, it's just helpful to kind of see the other side of that. And I had a couple bullet points for those of you who are applying to grant panels and wanting to kind of know on the other side, here's some things that we talk about. Did you answer the prompt? I mean, it's so simple, but like sometimes it's just way off and like the content is really good. It's really beautifully written, but like, did you answer the question? And sometimes like, even if it's like such a good project, you can't award points because the question is missed. And you can't assume that people know who you are. And that's a mistake that I've definitely done before because I'm like, yeah, everybody has like been to one of my shows or kind of knows. And so I don't have to explain that project anymore. And it's like, no, because in addition to not everybody in the room maybe knowing who you are, sometimes they're anonymous. And so your name will be removed or any sort of identifying factors that would maybe point to like the name of a show that I did would be removed. So you would have to give some context and not just kind of speak thinking that somebody might already know some of those things. You have to retell the story and use the language to help people, you know, color that understanding. You also have to learn to understand how to like quantify and qualify your outcomes. And that's something that's really hard, especially when we're working in the creative field, right? It's like, well, everyone will feel good and we'll all have a good day. It's like, okay, we have to learn how to put those kind of like harder metrics on here because unfortunately, And fortunately, that is what like grant panels are looking for. Like, how is this going to be measured? How can you measure impact? And unless you're seeking out to be on a grant panel or like looking and asking for the rubric for which they've graded your work, you're not going to understand the metrics at which you're grading. So once you kind of start to see that language, or you can ask, like, you can ask me, I can like read over your work and be like, okay, let's set up some metrics for success for this. So not that, and it'll all be done and everyone will feel good and we'll all have like solved racism, or, you know, like it's not easy like that, right? It has to have some sort of measurable outcomes for your work that can be kind of broken down. And then, like I said, you always just like ask for feedback and your rubric. Sometimes they'll give it to you. Sometimes they'll give you your score and feedback, and that's so helpful. And sometimes it feels like a dagger to the heart, but, you know, kind of look at it and understand that it's not saying this is about you. It's just like, how did this fit this prompt? And maybe it didn't fit the prompt, and that's okay. And I've done things before, like I've applied for certain things and haven't gotten it, and then I've applied for it with another thing. And it doesn't mean it was a bad idea. It was just a bad fit for that. Like it was just a square peg in a round hole, and that is okay. And you don't have to like dilute your idea to fit into something else. You just have to seek the things that matter. So for me as an artist, I've really placed a lot of importance in making my work rather than kind of suturing the work to fit into something else. That's where I found success. Like it'll come, the right opportunity will come, the right exhibition will come, rather than me responding to this like outside stimuli. So yeah, just ask to be on a grant panel or just try to be a part of it, and or ask somebody who's been on panels to kind of review your work, and then they can look at it with this eye that's like kind of thinking about the metrics and the language. And something that's really helpful is don't like under oversell what you've got. Like you have to tell them what this grant is going to do. So sometimes people will be kind of overly confident and like, yeah, we're going to do it regardless. And it's like, well, then you won't get the grant because you just told them you don't need it. Or sometimes people go and kind of the pendulum swings in the opposite direction. They're like, we can't do anything because we have no dollars and one pencil. And that doesn't work either, because they want to see that there's some structure to where when they invest their money, because that's what this is, it's an investment of money, often taxpayer dollars, and kind of like a bet on this artist or this creative entity to pull through with this project that's going to have a communal benefit. So they're betting on that that you'll do this. So it's kind of in the middle. Show them that you've got it figured out already and you need this amount to help make this extra special, wonderful thing happen. And it's not going to happen without that amount. And not kind of on the extremes either way, which I think people tend to kind of live on the extremes in their language. And then the last piece of advice is a piece of advice I got from a filmmaker when I was in artist campaign school in Detroit. Which it's a common phrase, but the more specific, the more universal. So the more that you can speak to who you're going to serve and what neighborhood and who lives there and how you're going to do it, the better. Like be as specific as possible, because that's how people can relate to your storytelling. Not like, oh, we'll do some classes over 4 weeks. We don't know where or who or which 4 weeks. Like just be as specific as possible, and it always lands well. So those are just like, from my perspective as a person who kind of straddles both of those worlds, that's what's helpful to me that I think that maybe the regular applicant might not understand.
I so appreciate that, Bree. And I think one of the things that really underlies what you just described is that every panelist I have ever known is someone with ASC. All of our panelists are volunteers, and they are really coming to the process because they love the creative work that's here and they want to continue to support it. And so while sometimes hearing that feedback can feel like that dagger that you mentioned, it is never meant to cut anyone down. It is always meant as a way of trying to encourage the very best. And unfortunately, oftentimes we're trying to encourage the very best with limited resources. And so it leads to really difficult decisions. And I think usually panelists go out really proud of what has been able to be supported, but also with an interest of how do we continue to support those groups that might not have received the funding this time around. So Tiffany, I wonder, you have participated in our operating support panels where we've had external reviewers from outside of the county participate. What have you learned about Charlotte's creative scene in the feedback that you've heard from those panelists?
Sure. So I think one of the most interesting things, because we have panelists come from all across the country with, we've had people from Atlanta and Austin and Denver and Chicago and these incredible cities, which I think Charlotte's still the best, but that's just me. I'm a native Charlottean. I'm going to be biased. But we've had a lot of, and they're always impressed with our level of community. And I think that resonates with a lot of feedback that we received during our grant panel review, is how tight-knit our community is, and that the grant applications that really seem to shine showcase how connected we are versus how separate we are. And I think even some of the applications that from the operating support that we reviewed, panelists would be like, I want to go to this space. I want to see what it's about while I'm here. I've got 20 extra minutes. I want to see this space. So I think what we've learned in Charlotte is that our cultural scene is very vibrant. And creative individuals that help create that ecosystem here, right, are valued and appreciated. And it's really a showcase of Charlotte's talent, and people outside of Charlotte really gravitate towards that. There were several times where panelists would say, oh my gosh, I wish we had something like that here. I wish we could mirror something like that. So I would also say that Charlotte is a leader when it comes to innovation for some of these projects. And while we may sometimes take for granted the opportunities that we have, other smaller jurisdictions and other smaller cities look at us as a pioneer, and they would love just a small portion of what we have. So there's also a sense of gratitude for being able to explore and being able to go to different spaces and have these cultural experiences, because we also have to remember there's a big portion of our community, of our country, that this is not part of their normal everyday. So we're also very lucky and grateful to have opportunities to experience culture on a day-to-day basis through accessible artists like the ones that are supported through operating support grants and cultural vision grants.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting pieces, whether it's an external panel or folks from right here in Charlotte, is that the panel process gives us an insight into the organizations and the creative individuals and the work they're doing that you don't necessarily see just by showing up to the gallery exhibit or to the performance. That you get insight into the work that's behind all of that, kind of the image of the iceberg, right? And what is the depth that's there, I think really stands out and is part of the what you get to really appreciate as a panel member. Keith, I want to ask you about opportunities that you've had of kind of that aha moment when you've seen a panel, kind of people come into having read an application, seeing different perspectives and come to a consensus around a decision moving forward. Have you experienced any kind of aha moments or places where you saw that collective deliberation create change? You're still muted.
There we go.
There
For some
we
reason,
go.
it says the host has to unmute me, but you might be checking your Robinhood account. That's why you don't see me trying to get on. But I think, what I've seen, particularly in the room, is that, a lot of times, the people that are reviewing the applications that are going to do the voting, we may or may not know each other. We don't know each other's backgrounds. We don't know our preoccupations. We don't even know what our level of interest in art is. And so when we're looking at those applications, as Bree has, pointed out, there may not be names on them, just the work. And so someone's familiarity, with the arts, with the cultural scene may not know particularly where this piece may fit on a particular side of town or somewhere else. And so those deep dive conversations inside the room, we're really trying to, get an expansive history. I think one, on Charlotte, where are those spots that need art and culture? What are we missing? Is this artist representative, of that particular community or that side of town? Is the work going to speak in terms of, sustainability? Is it going to be a viable piece of art down the road? So all those questions are floating around. So while every artist, we all want to believe every artist is the best, there can only be one particular piece or artist that we're going to vote on that's going to get those funds. And that's a tough decision to make, because you're looking at all these from those perspectives. Everyone's bringing that into the room. And so you're trying to make sure through a through a conversation that we're all on the same page, that we recognize that, while there's going to be some people with some hurt feelings, hopefully that we will uplift, whoever that person is that we've selected, and that side of town or that community or wherever that piece of art is going, whoever's got those grant dollars, whatever that project is going to be, it really will shout and speak, long term for whatever it is. And I think that's why, when Bree is talking about speaking to the details of the RFP, speaking to the application, we need to have all that information. You're trying to make the best decision you can. I think sometimes in an hour, a lot of times these processes are over a couple of days, maybe 1 or 2 days, and you're trying to, mine all that down in a really short time with what you have, which is the information that's on the page, or the descriptions, maybe some pictures, and that may not even be the piece that they're going to use. They're just submitting some examples of what they're going to do. So a lot of times you just got to make sure that one, give us all that you can. I think I think I talk to people all the time. Trying to write a grant or speak to a grant, sometimes that process is long and it sucks. No one wants to sit there and fill out a 10-page RFP for the possibility of getting something. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to try to pare some of that paperwork down, try to make that process a little bit easier, so that folk can get in, particularly if you've never done it before, and that helps make our decision-making process a little bit easier.
Yeah, there's definitely a balance between trying to have enough information for a panel to be able to make an honest evaluation of what's there without making it an overburdensome application to submit, right? So absolutely, that is one of the challenges for grant applicants as well as grant panel members. I'm gonna drop into the chat the link if folks want to sign up to be considered to serve on a panel for ASC. We're always glad to get volunteers. And so we have on our website a link for folks to be able to sign up to serve as a grant panelist. And really you're kind of putting your name into the pool. We have to make sure that each panel is representative of the purpose of that grant and the community at whole. So we love to have all of those names in there to be able to select and make sure that we get that representation. We'd love to include some folks that are on this call. So as I'm doing that, I'm wondering if I could ask each of the folks that have joined the call, Tiffany, Keith, and Bree, what one piece of advice would you offer to someone who's considering serving on a panel for the first time? Keith, do you want to start?
Sure. I think, just in terms of practical advice, one, make sure that you are engaged in our cultural and, and art sector here in Charlotte. I think you need to know, local artists. A lot of times we focus on national artists. People talk about getting inside and getting involved in the arts. Start locally. Look at what's been going on your side of town. And then taking a deeper look at what's going on other sides of town. And I think that way you can start to recognize, what's happening, who's doing what, who's the hot mural artist, things that are popping. You really want to be involved in the community. You want to see the stuff for yourself. Take those walks. Get outside. I know it's pretty tough now, but try to get out as much as possible so you can see, you can engage, you can talk, particularly talking to living artists, so what their needs are. And you can get inside, their space, and you can recognize how you can best help them, because that's what this process is. You're trying to help out these artists as best you can, and you need to do that coming with as enough information as you can, so you can kind of have that balance. When you have that conversation, if you're looking at an application, you understand what can I do to best serve our community by making sure that this particular grant goes to this particular area. So I think the more information you come equipped with, and not doing this just because you have nothing else to do, or it's a resume filler or whatever, if it's a selfish reason, I think you need to take yourself out of that process and really think about, again, how can I best serve our community through this process and help out artists the best way I can.
Absolutely. Bree?
Yeah, I completely agree with Keith too. I think you have a communal responsibility to be a part of and to be actively practicing and showing up for the community. in order to participate on these things. It's more important than I can give words to. And also the communal context helps to inform the grant process as well. Like, I mean, there have been times where we've been in a room and people said, I've worked with them and I did not have a good experience, or the other way around, maybe their language was a little weak on their grant, but I've worked with them and I love them. So we're going to bump them up the list a little bit, right? And so it goes far if you can speak on those experiences and talk about the web of relationships that you've built. But one of my pieces of advice is to fight for who you love in the grants. Like, if you have a project that you really like, score accordingly. And I know that when I first started, I would kind of score like sweetly, and I'd be like, I really love this, it's gonna get an 8, and I'd be like, ooh, that wasn't so good, 7. And then at the end of the process, I would be upset that like the things I didn't like would get it and the things that I loved didn't. And it was like, wow, I really didn't speak up, and I didn't create enough of a margin to help make sure those things drive home. And like Keith said, it's only a 1 or a 2 day process. So like the conversation's done, like when it's done and the scores are submitted. Yeah. And so it's like, if you really, really want something to happen, like be the squeaky wheel, because you're like, wow, that's a really cool idea that I've never heard of. And I think that that's like something that's really missing in our community, because it's the things that get talked about that get funded.
Yeah. Yeah. Panelists have a really important part in that whole process. Tiffany? Any final words of advice from you?
Everything I've heard, in addition to just being prepared when you show up. I mean, participants put a lot of time into preparing their grant, so read it thoroughly, I think is fair. And then the second thing is to challenge the process. If there are communities that are not represented in the applicant pool, I think it's your responsibility to say that I don't see any organizations of color. I don't see any LGBTQIA organizations in this list. I don't see any organizations outside of this area code or this zip code. And I think it's important as a panelist that you do bring that lens of equity, right, into that review, into the whole process, so that not only are you reviewing the applicants for that grant, but you're also making an impact on the next cycle and the cycles to come. So it's important for you to also challenge the grant process if you feel as though there are some key individuals or key persons or key communities that have not been engaged.
Absolutely. And that feedback, that both it's the selections that are made by panelists and the feedback that they give to the process, that really informs our ability to extend work throughout the community. So Robert, I haven't seen any questions jump in the chat box, but I'm wondering if you have any other questions or final thoughts you wanted to jump in with.
I have not seen any questions. So I think that means that the panel and you, Liz, have done a great job of presenting content. If we're at a point of wrapping up, which we're just a couple of minutes shy of 1:15, my final words are, thank you for joining us, of course. And we look forward to hosting more conversations like this. I did get a comment from Julian Jant saying that he was looking forward to more of these. So just wanted to make sure y'all are aware of when the next one is coming up, because we've got a hold currently on February 25th. That is a Thursday, last Thursday of the month, for our next conversation on cultural planning and ASC's role in making that happen in the Charlotte community.
Yeah. I do also want to add that I did put in the chat box the link. If you are interested in serving as a panel member, we'd love to hear from you. If you would fill out that form, that gives us, the form is designed to give us a sense of your background and kind of the perspective that you could bring to a grant panel. And we will follow up with folks that fill that form out to make sure that we kind of have you in mind and know where a good place is. I did see one question come in of when do the grant panels happen? Are there certain times of the year? And our grant panels are happening throughout the year. So we kind of have an ongoing cycle of grants that open each spring, each summer, each fall. So, and they serve different purposes. And so we would definitely reach out for folks. And if a particular timing doesn't work for you to serve on a grant panel, that doesn't necessarily put you out. It might just mean we wait until another time comes up. So thanks, everyone.